Okay, well, I'm Henry Granison. I want to thank the New York Progressives for holding this event. I am really honored to be here, and I look forward to chatting away and having an interview. My story really begins with a number of lived experiences. I grew up in a working class African American family in Jersey City, New Jersey. I did not reflect on this very much, but we had an interesting childhood. My parents both worked full time because they had to work full time to support us. But my parents didn't always have things going their way. There were layoffs. We were on food stamps for some time. So I experienced that. I also experienced the biggest thing in my life, which was we were living in district where my grandmother lived. But then we moved out of that area to another area. And my parents made the decision, which I credit with saving me, that they would not send me to school in the new district. There was a new school being built in that new district, but it was in the heart of the ghetto. And they decided that, no, I would stay in the district where my grandmother lived. And as a relatively smart kid, it would have been very difficult to go to that school. And yet my parents made that decision, which, again, I feel like really saved my life. Also, in terms of lived experiences, my family has been, victims of crime. Before I went off to college, my brother was murdered. And before I went to law school, one of my best friends from college was murdered. But I don't reflect upon that, I don't think about it very much, but it does have something to say about the life that I grew up with and how I handle things and how I deal with things. Also, when I moved, we lived in Jersey City until I was in 4th grade. And then we moved to Hillside, New Jersey, which was a nice suburb of Newark, New Jersey. When I was in Jersey City, only the teachers were white in the school. All the students were African American. And then when I moved to Hillside, it was 70% white. And I transitioned quite well. But again, it was a hard transition to make from being in an all-black school to a mostly white school. But again, these are the experiences that I lived. And then another important decision, which leads me to some of my other positions, is when I was going away to college, my parents said, well, we don't have very much money, and so you can go where you want to go, but within limits. And so I applied everywhere. I got in everywhere I applied, and my dream school was Harvard. But no way we could afford Harvard. But as it turned out, my father worked for Western Electric, and he was a member of the IBEW union. And so I applied for a scholarship, and I won the scholarship from his union. And that's what made it possible for me to really go to college, to the college of my choice. And so these are the lived experiences that I bring to the table. I don't think of myself as a success. Well, I should also say that I went to Cornell Law School. Go Big Red. And so these are the experiences I lived and the stuff that I bring to the table, knowing about being in poverty and knowing about how to rise up and use education to get through to achieve things.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
So what does being progressive mean to you?
What being progressive means, the basic term means change or reform, and as opposed to staying the same. So I see it as wanting to change things for the better. And so I think in terms of energy policy, that in terms of doing that, promoting alternative energy provisions of that. In terms of healthcare, promoting single payer in New York State. I see that as being progressive, as wanting to change, as opposed to making America great again, to again change things up, to do things for the better, and to reform.
So I'm going to apologize. I'm going to switch questions because I didn't realize that we were allowed to pick any question off here, so I'm sorry this is different, but it'll be the same now for everyone else. We'll get better as we go with this. Okay, do you see systemic discrimination and racial exclusion in the county or municipality that you are running for? If so, how would you address it as an elected official? What specific plans would you try to enact?
That's a really tough question for me. I do not experience systemic discrimination and racism, racial exclusion on a daily basis. But as a good friend of mine used to say, race never takes a holiday. And so I'm assuming that there is that in the county in many levels where you don't know where it happens. It's happening underground, it's happening quietly, it's happening with people making decisions that affect things. So I think that the way that I would combat that would, one, be by my presence, that being an elected official would in fact be a role model to people and show people that yes, an African American man can become a county legislature in this county. And that also I would speak on it as often as I can to talk about racism and exclusion in those kind of examples. It reminds me of an example that I experienced when I was in Minnesota. I worked for the the Office of Lawyers' Professional Responsibility, which disciplined other lawyers. We were employees of the Supreme Court of Minnesota, but we were not in their building. So one morning I went to diversity training, in fact, and I was walking I parked in the parking lot, was walking with a number of colleagues into the garage, and with a number of other people. This woman berates me about who am I, why am I going in this secured elevator, and do I have an ID or whatever. She only berates me. She doesn't berate anybody else. And I just answered her questions very quietly and just got in the elevator. Well, she did not have the intent, I assume, to racially exclude me or to berate me. I assume her intent was, okay, I am really just protecting the court from people who could, interlopers coming in. But it was actually an example in the diversity training that very day was that very situation. And the other thing that was interesting is I was wearing a suit that day, the same as all my other colleagues. And so she was berating someone who was an African-American man wearing a suit into the Supreme Court, but she thought it was an interloper. But again, I don't think many people have that in mind, but I think it's an automatic or gut reaction that they quickly respond to. And so hopefully through education, through exposure, through all these other things, people will learn not to do it. Because again, most of the blatant racism is gone. There are a few people, but most people, it's just a way of thinking. It's just a way of acting or reacting very quickly, like the microaggression of clutching your purse, which I've had people do in elevators or whatever. And again, just explain to people, well, look, I'm not a threat to you. Even though I'm a large black man, I'm not a threat. I'm not, whatever. And just trying to keep people exposed to that over time, and hopefully that will solve the problem.
So we have about 11 minutes for the rest of our questions and answers.
Okay, I'll try to make it quicker.
But then we can give 10 minutes to the public. So what is your stance on increasing property taxes to address local community needs?
Well, my platform is partly protecting the safety net. And so I would clearly want to be able to raise taxes to do that. But again, I also like to be a good steward of the funding and resources. So with the current safety net, hopefully the challenges to the net will end after 2 years, if we're lucky. And so, I am for raising property taxes, but I'm also going to try to maybe cut other spending before raising property taxes, because I've talked to people in the district and taxes are very high, and people are moving because taxes are increasing so much. And so we really need to keep an eye on that, and it's an unsustainable plan. I mean, raising taxes indefinitely is not going to work. And so we have to, again, only raise taxes on critical situations, like, again, the loss of the safety net.
Thank you.
Send it over there. Look, yeah. Why you go over? Yeah, just 'cause- yeah.
Shake it up a little.
Yeah.
So the last couple of projects that the IDA has approved have been large buildings on the commons. Does this, in your opinion, meet the needs of our community? And if not, how would you change IDA's practices or rules to improve its performance?
Sure, the IDA has accomplished a lot since 1973. It's created 4,200 jobs. It's done 119 projects. It's invested over $1 billion in the area. And so, again, these are all great statistics. But I think, it's also paid $46 million in taxes. But how many taxes did it not raise? And so what I would do is focus on two of the questions on the IDA application. Will the employer pay a prevailing wage, and also will they use local labor? And so right now I read some of the minutes, and people say, "Oh, well, geez, I wish we could require that. I wish that they would use local labor." And I think that we should beef that up, and that some people think that Ithaca is overdeveloped now. I don't agree, but again, some people do think that. And so I think that by requiring them to pay the prevailing wage, putting more weight on that issue and more weight on using local labor would be the two requirements that I would really press on them to, in fact, require from the IDA from projects going forward.
As Kim did, I think that I want to switch my question only because I wasn't aware that we could only pick one and use one for the night. I apologize. But as Kim, I will ask this question from the following candidates. Governor Cuomo wants every county in the state to look into consolidation of government offices. How do you think that Tompkins County should approach this? How would you go about implementing your recommendation?
Okay, I know that the Tompkins County Council of Governments is already looking at these kind of issues. And so I would say if it's not fixed, if it's not broken, don't fix it. That, again, I would refer this to the Council of Governments to look at the issue and to come back and report to the legislature on issues like that. If there is a need, or if there's a belief that shared services is not going that well with the Council of Governments, then I think that perhaps we need a new committee through the legislature to in fact look at the issue and deal with it. There's also the report that came out in 2015 on shared services about how the county was ahead of the game, in terms of shared services and how Cuomo's not giving credit for all the shared services that the county has already done. And so I think that we may be running at the end of the line. Now, I know there's a police study going on, but we may be running at the end of the line for shared services. I know there was a court study done recently, and that really sort of fell by the wayside. But again, I think that if there is a concern that we really need to beef this up, then a committee, and then bring back the recommendations to the county legislature.
All right, I'll go and then. What is your approach to consensus building in a group? Please give an example that demonstrates that.
Sure. My consensus building skills would be mostly asking questions of people. And because, again, I don't think that you really learn anything by talking. You really learn more by listening to people. And so an example of that is when I go out canvassing. I've talked to people and I ask them questions. As I get them to sign my petition, I also get them to tell me about the county concerns. And and right now, the biggest issue is, in fact, the roads in the city, which I just swerved by one last night on State Street. But again, I think that asking questions and talking to people is the best way. I also, and professionally, I worked at Cornell Law School in an admissions office. And we used to always, when we made admissions decisions in committee, we do it by consensus. And so we had to have a unanimous vote. And so we talked it out, we talked to the outliers to see what their concerns were. We really just sort of sat around a room and talked about that group decision until we finally came to a result. And the results varied. Sometimes we admitted the person, sometimes we did not. The sole person, outlier, would win. But again, we built consensus that way, and we did that for a number of years.
I think we have about 5 minutes.
Well, I think you already made it clear that you're very much in support of single-payer health care. And I just wonder if you have anything to add to that and what your information might be as far as the New York State Health Act. Do you know where we're at and where we're going?
Well, I know that the Assembly passed it, and it's in the Senate right now. But I was reading today that the Senate is probably expected not to pass it. But again, I don't have a crystal ball to know what they would do. And again, the question is, even if the Senate passes it, whether the governor would sign it. Because I've seen different reports. One report is that it would save a lot of money, and other reports are that it would be a staggering amount of taxes on people for single payer. But again, these are different studies, and so I haven't looked at it that closely to look at the individual studies. But I know there's also a bill in California too, going up for single payer, and they compared the two. And again, depending who you believe, estimates are that it would, it would triple or double the tax rate in New York State. And so we clearly don't want that. But again, other reports is that it would eliminate property taxes. And so I don't know which to believe, but again, those are the reports. And I know that people put out various reports for various reasons, and so I'd have to study it more to look at it.
Well, you answered which I should have asked Mr. Shapiro as well. I guess my question is, are you willing to read it, both the Assembly version and the Senate version? Because it's not very long, and I would encourage you and everyone else who's
Sure.
interested in it
Yeah,
to just take a look at it. Because then you're not dependent on reports. You can discern for yourself what it's about.
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with a question.
If you have other paid work or family demands, can you tell us how you plan to balance your responsibilities? How many hours a week can you allot to your responsibilities at the legislature?
Yes, this is an easy question for me because I have grown children. One's in St. Louis and the other one's back there. And they're both, well, one's out of the house, but the other one isn't. And I also have a flexible job. I teach at TC3 on an online basis. And so I could devote 40 hours a week to this job or whatever amount of time would be necessary. for this job because I have a flexible schedule. Like right now, I'm not working during the summer, and so I'm free. And so I think that that was part of the reason why I ran for this position, because I knew I'd have the time for it. I knew that, basically at the stage in my life now, I'm ready to give back. In terms of work-life balance, I think that I would probably tend to focus more on the job initially, probably doing in excess of 40 hours. But then I would, try to deal with the learning curve, and then figure out, okay, how much time can I really spend on it, and really sort of carve out times where I can have a balance. But again, right now, with a flexible, schedule, I could devote as much time as needed.
Awesome. So I'm going to just take something from your flyer. You say on here, I strongly believe in the traditional ideals of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
And so I would like to ask two kind of questions. For one, we're the Progressive Committee for kind of a reason. So in what non-traditional democratic value do you have? And then also, does that make sense?
No.
So, so if we take the traditional democratic values, I guess this is a better question. What is a non-traditional democratic value that you have? Or better, what could the current Democrats that are maybe instilling these traditional values, what could they be doing better to better?
What they could be doing better is and I was going to talk about this in my opening statement, but again, the belief is when I was young, the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans were that Democrats favored the poor, Republicans favored the rich. Very simplistic, but that was the analysis. My analysis on that flyer is really that the Democrats would solve problems for the poor, solve problems for the working class, solve problems for African Americans, solve problems for people who are marginalized. And I think that clearly Clinton did that in terms of people of color, but she didn't do it in terms of working class people. We know that, in fact, that many of the union support went Republican. And so many of the other people, the working class people, went Republican. And so I think that has to be something that has to be paid attention to. And that's my vision of what the Democratic Party stood for, what it's always stood for. Again, helping people, on the margins, and helping people, make it out of poverty or having a good life or solving their problems for them. And so those are the principles that I believe in, and I believe that the Democratic Party has lost. Just like the whole thing with the minimum wage, which I've been asked about, a living wage. I feel very strongly about that, and I feel that is one of the issues that Hillary was late to coming to. That Bernie was clearly ahead of the game on that, and that Hillary came only step by step by maybe trying to encroach Bernie's issue on it. But again, that would be an issue that I think would be a perfect example of how I feel about things.
Thank you. So I wanted to invite someone from our audience to come on up and ask a question. If people do want to ask a question, we have tons more questions to ask if you guys don't want to. Hey, Barbara, come on up. I would walk over to you, but I wouldn't make it.
Hi. I've been active with Decarcerate Tompkins. I've been active with Decarcerate Tompkins, and we've been working to make sure that no new jail cells are built with regard to the current jail expansion project, and one of my ongoing concerns is that when we testify at the legislature, when we go to the county legislature meetings, it always feels like we're positioned as the rabble, and that the county legislature legislators and their invited guests are the experts. So in other words, the CGR firm, the firm that the previous candidate basically said, you know, was not qualified to do what they were doing, which we certainly agree with. They're treated sort of like princes, like they have a right to be there. And I've seen this repeated over and over again with other kinds of testimony in front of the legislature. So I guess I want to know, in terms of democratic process, how can public testimony be organized or arranged? What might a different approach be in terms of a relationship between the county legislature and public testimony? What might feel, what might be genuinely more respectful? There's also no setup for dialogue once people have testified. And that isn't to say that individual legislators don't occasionally reach out, but typically that doesn't happen.
Right. I've been to the legislature meetings and I've seen you testify, and yes, it does seem like certain people are treated like rabble. That, you know, you testify and then they sit there, they sit there silently, and then they move on. You know, maybe, although with the timing is an issue, but maybe there can be a time period for dialogue that could be proposed. That, you know, that if they want to set aside a time for the legislature to meet and have a time to dialogue with you, so that you really can feel that, okay, people are listening to you, and that, you know, and that now legislators are probably going to duck the dialogue, but some of them may engage in it. Some of them may ask you questions or may talk to you about it, and maybe give people 4 minutes, but include dialogue in it, and give them 2 minutes to talk and 2 minutes for dialogue, or something like that, so that you can have an interaction with someone. So instead of them just talking to a room full of people and then leaving and just feeling that you're talking to you know, people just sitting there, you can have a dialogue with people, and maybe, you know, get a sense of what they're thinking, or whether they doubt you, whether they believe you, whether they are taking your evidence seriously.
Thank you. Do we have one last question?
What could single payer do for Tompkins County?
What can who?
What could single payer healthcare do for Tompkins County?
Well, again, there's a debate about that. It could, in fact, you know, eliminate property taxes. It could solve many of our medical problems. It could be great, or it could increase taxes significantly. And so, you know, I really don't know what single payer can do for Tompkins County, but that's the range of things that it can do for Tompkins County. But again, I've not studied enough to know specifically what it's going to do. But again, those are the two extremes that it could do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.